My life didn't really fall apart the day the doctor said, cancer. It shattered on a random afternoon when the insurance company called and asked me about a series of reconstruction surgeries, complications, and hospital stays. Every single one under my name for procedures I had never lain on an operating table for. That afternoon, my kitchen still smelled like stale coffee and the chicken soup I'd left simmering since morning. I was sitting there straightening a stack of flyers for my husband's charity, the one he started in my honor. My face was on every page, smiling in a pale green headscarf. The landline rang, same old harsh rattle it had made for 20 years, the sound that always reminded me of my raw throat during chemo. "May I please speak with Mrs. Linda Reed?" a woman's voice asked, older, polite, but with a tightness underneath. "This is she," I answered, still running my fingers over my own printed smile. "We're calling from your health insurance provider. We'd like to verify some details about your post-breast cancer procedures, bilateral reconstruction, complication management, follow-up admissions. Over the last 3 years, there are a few inconsistencies with the hospital records on file." I went quiet. The kitchen fell dead still. I could hear the wall clock ticking, each click landing like a pebble on glass. I leaned back in my chair and tried to remember if I had ever gone under the knife again after the original lumpectomy. I hadn't. Just chemo follow-ups, blood work, no more scalpels, no more anesthesia. "I'm sorry, but I only had surgery once, years ago," I said slowly. "I never had reconstruction. I'm still like this." There was a long silence on her end. I heard typing, papers shuffling. "Are you sure, Mum? The claims list a reconstruction surgery and a later procedure for complications. Both are logged under your name. The attending surgeon listed is Dr. Calvin Reed, and the patient is you." My husband's name hung in the air like a heavy metal weight dropped on my kitchen floor. I looked up at our wedding photo on the wall. Calvin in a dark suit, hair still thick and dark back then, his arm wrapped around me, smiling wide and sure of himself. The same face I saw now on the nameplate at his clinic, in the photos of us at fundraisers, hand on my shoulder, microphone in his other hand, telling our story. I don't remember ever having those surgeries," I swallowed. "If I had, I think I'd remember." "Because the dollar amounts are significant," the woman said, her voice dropping lower, like she was afraid someone might overhear. "We're sending you a detailed printout of all claims filed under your name. Please review them carefully for us. This may be a simple system error, but we do need your personal confirmation." I hung up with my hand still shaking around the receiver. The flyers in front of me suddenly looked strange. There I was, a woman in her mid-50s, headscarf wrapped tight, smiling a tired little smile right next to the words, "Linda, the hope story of the Second Chance Hope Foundation." That's what Calvin named the charity. He said my survival was our second chance from God, and he wanted to use my story to raise money for other women fighting breast cancer. I believed him. I sat in front of the church crowd, telling them how my lump was found by accident, how I spent nights on the bathroom floor dry heaving from chemo, how Calvin would pull the blankets up for me when I shook with chills. I thought the tears in his eyes were real. I thought the way his voice caught when he said, "I almost lost my wife," was real. The women my age in the pews clapped. Some came up to hug me afterwards, whispering, "You're so strong." They dug in their purses, pulled out envelopes, wrote checks to my husband's foundation, and I felt warmed by that. Like my pain wasn't wasted, like it could help someone else. So for years, whenever Calvin said, "Honey, sign these insurance forms for me," I've highlighted the spots. It's just authorizations, just sharing your records for the foundation. You don't need to worry. I never questioned it. I'd push my reading glasses up my nose, sign where he'd marked in yellow, and go back to the stove, back to my small life as a woman who'd beat cancer and felt like she owed the world and her husband a debt. That afternoon, when the mailman dropped a thick envelope from the insurance company in our box, with the familiar logo in the corner, I assumed it was the same boring paperwork Calvin always snatched up and stuffed into his briefcase. But he was on night shift at the hospital. It was just me and the little radio in the kitchen humming an old hymn. I opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of pages, lines of codes and numbers and descriptions. On every page, my name, Linda Jean Reed, was printed in bold above the line that said, Attending Physician Calvin D. Reed, MD. His electronic signature sat there, neat and steady, not a tremor in sight. I traced the words with my fingertip. Bilateral reconstruction after breast cancer. Repeat surgery to manage complications. Inpatient follow-up. Dates spelled out clearly. One of them was the exact date I remembered standing in our church fellowship hall, wearing my pink sweater, telling people I had chosen not to have reconstruction because I didn't want to drain insurance money that could help others. I remembered that night perfectly. We drove home late. Calvin slid an arm around my shoulders in the parking lot, told me, "What you said really moved them. They're going to give more now." I remember the cold air cutting through my thin coat, how he laughed about the fundraising total. But on the papers on my kitchen table, the system said that same night I was lying on an operating table under his knife, my chest tightened. Not like the sharp stabbing pain of that original lump, but a different kind of ache. Low, heavy, like someone had quietly opened the deepest drawer in my heart, pulled out all my trust and laid it down on a scale next to stacks of cash. I braced both hands on the worn wooden table, trying to keep them from shaking. I'd always thought the worst thing illness took from me was my hair, my strength, those nights curled up on the bathroom floor. Turns out, worse than that is waking up one day and realizing your name, not your body, not your heart, but your name, has been used by the person you call husband as a tool to make money. I didn't sleep that night. I spread the papers across the table, dragged over the old lamp, put on my readers and read every line, over and over. The deeper I read, the more it felt like somebody had taken a pencil and started scribbling over entire years of my life, layering on medical events that never happened. There was a page for an admission. That day, I remembered sitting at home hemming some old hospital gowns to donate to the support group at church. My feet were numb. I had to sit on a tall stool. The radio was playing a sermon about honesty in all things. On paper that same day, I was admitted for complications post-reconstruction. Kept 2 nights under Dr. Calvin Reed's close supervision, I lifted my hand to the old scar on my chest. It was the same faint line from the first surgery. No new cuts, no new stitches. Nothing changed except the years. I folded the pages and held them to my chest like they were a sick child. The clock on the wall crawled toward midnight. Outside, the backyard was all shadows and dry branches shifting in the wind. A few miles away, Calvin was probably walking hospital halls in his white coat, voice steady and reassuring. People saw him and trusted him. I had trusted him for over 20 years. The next morning, I brewed coffee early. The smell filled the kitchen. Trying to cover the sour scent of my own worry, Calvin came home from his shift, eyes a little dark underneath, but smiling. He set his briefcase down and kissed my forehead like always. "You're up early," he said, reaching for a mug. "I couldn't sleep," I answered. Trying to keep my voice level, I went to the fridge for milk. My hands shook so much I spilled some around the rim. "Are you hurting somewhere?" he asked, watching me carefully. "You need to tell me, don't hide things from me." "No, it's not pain." I set the carton down and took a breath. "The insurance company called yesterday. They sent these papers." I picked up the envelope and handed it over. Calvin slid out the pages, glanced through the first few. I watched his face, looking for shock, for confusion, anything that matched the way I'd felt the night before. His expression barely changed. Maybe the corner of his mouth twitched into a half smile I couldn't quite read. "Oh, this," he said, sitting at the table and laying the papers down. "It's just coding, the way they label things. Insurance always makes everything sound more complicated than it is." "But it says I had reconstruction," I said, slowly pointing to the bold line. "You know I didn't." You know that. He looked up at me. That look had melted my anger more times than I could count. It almost worked again. Linda, he said, dropping his voice into that tone he used with difficult patience. How much do you really remember from those last months of treatment? You told me you couldn't remember what you ate the day before or whether you left the house or not. You forgot your follow-up appointments. You really think your memory from that time is reliable enough to keep track of everything? I opened my mouth to argue and stopped. It was true, my memory was foggy back then. Some nights I'd wake up and not know if I was in the hospital or at home, and I'd have to feel the old quilt to tell. I remembered brushing my scalp and watching hair slide off into the sink, crying until my eyes blurred. There were blank patches. I'm just trying to take care of you, Calvin went on, resting his hand near mine but not quite touching. Just because the insurance forms say something doesn't mean they did it right, I'll call them. Don't let a stack of soulless paperwork upset you. You're who I care about, not those codes. But the amounts are huge, I whispered. If it's a mistake, won't that hurt us later? Won't they refuse future treatment? We're honest people, Calvin. You say that in church all the... His eyes darkened. This time his hand did land on mine, but the touch wasn't as gentle. What are you implying? That I, your husband, your doctor, am using your illness to... cash in? His voice sharpened. Is that what you think of me? I don't know, I stammered, pulling my hand back. I'm just scared. Who do you trust more? He pressed. Some stranger on the phone at an insurance office, or the man who sat up with you through every single chemo night? His volume went up a notch. You're tired. You're anxious. It's making you paranoid. Let me handle this. Go lie down. Stop reading this stuff. He gathered up the papers, shoved them back into the envelope, clearly intending to slip them into his briefcase. I watched, feeling like I'd half won and half lost. Won because part of me wanted to believe him and calm down. Lost because that sharp little splinter of doubt stayed right where it was. A week later, the second call came. This time the woman introduced herself as Marjorie from the Fraud Investigation Unit. She spoke slowly, each word measured. Mrs. Reed, I've gone through your file very carefully, she said. I've worked in this field for 30 years. The claims under your name have several irregularities. My heart sped up. I sat down, squeezing the phone so tight my knuckles went white. What kind of irregularities? I asked, my voice rough. Dates of surgery that overlap with documented activity elsewhere, she said. One claim shows a 2-night hospital stay while your credit card records show purchases at a store 10 miles away. Another lists a procedure that the facility in question isn't equipped to perform. We'd like to meet with you in person. You're not under investigation, but we do need your cooperation. I hesitated. I thought about Calvin's stare when I'd questioned him. I thought about that little church, Sunday mornings, him on the small stage being introduced as a doctor and a husband of a survivor. I heard in my head the whispers, poor Calvin, such a devoted man with such a fragile wife. Where would we meet? I finally asked. We chose a family diner off the highway, neutral ground where nobody really knew me. Marjorie got there early, sitting in a back booth. She was about my age, hair more grey than mine, pulled back neatly. Her eyes were dark but kind. There was already a mug of hot tea waiting on my side of the table. I know this isn't easy, she said as soon as I sat down, especially when the doctor in question is your husband. I've been in a position where I had to choose between protecting someone I loved and protecting the truth. It hurts, but I believe you're strong enough to face it. I let out a crooked little laugh. You talk like you know me. She opened her briefcase and laid out the same printouts I had seen, and more. She had screenshots from the Foundation's website. My picture next to Calvin under the headline, A Successful Full Reconstruction Story. I never had reconstruction, I whispered, my throat tightening. I told everyone at church that I didn't do it. I said I turned it down because I didn't want to spend more insurance money, so it could go to others. I believe you, Marjorie said softly. The hospital where you received care confirms your official chart shows only one surgery. No reconstruction, no additional admissions. But in the insurance system, your name is attached to 4 separate surgical claims, all submitted by Dr. Calvin Reed. He routed them through the Foundation's program that's supposed to help underinsured patients. Through the Foundation, I repeated, staring at my own smiling face on a glossy brochure. You mean the money people donated, plus the insurance payouts, all ran through Calvin? Not just ran through, she said gently. A large portion stopped there. We've seen transfers from the Foundation's account into your husband's personal accounts, and you, Mrs. Reed, are listed as the recipient of many of those medical services. Without this investigation, the insurance company could eventually label you part of the fraud. They could refuse future coverage. My hands were ice cold. I wrapped them around the hot mug to feel something warm. I didn't know any of this, I said, each word falling out heavy. I signed what he put in front of me. He said it was authorizing the Foundation. He told me not to worry about money. I thought, that's what a wife is supposed to do, trust her husband. I'm not here to blame you, Marjorie said. I'm here because we need your help to shut down something that will hurt more people. If we don't, I know a good attorney who specializes in medical and insurance fraud. If you'd like, I can introduce you. You're going to need someone in your corner. That evening I told Calvin I was going to a Bible study. Instead, I spent 2 more hours with Marjorie and a younger man named Ethan. He dressed simply, nothing like the slick lawyers on television, but his eyes were clear and his voice calm. I'm not going to promise you'll get rich off this, he said, looking me straight in the eye. But I will do everything I can to separate your name from those fake claims, and if we can, to prevent other patients from getting pulled into the same trap. But he's my husband, I said, feeling dizzy. He's the one who operated on me, who saved me. I don't know if I have the stomach to... You don't have to decide everything tonight, Ethan replied gently, but there are a few steps you can take that don't blow this open yet. You have the legal right to request your full medical records directly from the hospital without going through your husband's clinic. You have the right to know what's been filed in your name. If you sign here, I can help with the rest. I looked at the authorization form. It wasn't thick, not crammed with jargon the way the papers Calvin brought home always were. Just a few lines giving Ethan permission to talk to the hospital and the insurance company on my behalf. My hand shook, but this time I didn't call Calvin. I didn't ask his opinion. I just picked up the pen and signed my name. As the tip of the pen left the paper, I felt something inside me tear. A small, thin thread I'd been using for years to tie myself to him, and to the image of him as this good, sacrificial doctor husband the whole town admired. It didn't snap all the way, but it frayed. The weeks after that felt strange. Calvin seemed busier. He got home late more often, blaming short-staffed shifts and the Foundation expanding, more donors to meet. The calendar on the kitchen wall filled up with red circles, board meetings, a photo shoot for the local paper, the big fall fundraising gala at church. Now and then he still shoved a few sheets across the table, saying, "Sign these, honey. I've already marked them. Gotta run." I stared at the highlighted spots. My hand didn't automatically move to sign anymore. "What are these?" I asked. "Same as always, media release, consent to share," he answered too quickly. "You're used to that by now, right? People love you. You want to help, don't you?" "Where's my name on here?" I pushed. Tracing the fine print, I found a line that said, "I, the undersigned, authorize Dr. Calvin Reed to act on my behalf to make decisions regarding..." and felt that cold prickle at the base of my neck. "Linda, what's going on with you?" he sighed, irritation plain now. "You've never picked apart paperwork like this before. You've trusted me for decades. Has someone been talking in your ear? Those women in your support group, they don't know what they're talking about with medical stuff." It felt like I was standing at a fork in the road. Down one path I shut up, signed, stayed the dutiful wife in the picture he painted for everyone. Down the other, I told him about Marjorie, about Ethan, about the records already pulled into the light. In the end, I simply pushed the stack back toward him. I'm tired, I said quietly. Let's do this another time. I'm not signing anything today. He stared at me, and this time his eyes held more than annoyance. There was something else there, wariness. Then he folded the papers and slipped them back into his briefcase. Fine, he said, voice cooler. But I hope you remember who saved your life, and who pays for this house, for your medications, for everything. That night I sat alone at the table with a bowl of soup that had gone cold. I turned his words over in my mind. Who saved your life? As if because he'd operated on me once, he now owned everything, my body, my name, every line of my medical record. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Ethan had emailed. The hospital confirmed what we already suspected. My official chart showed 1 surgery, no reconstruction, no readmissions, no complications treated on the dates Calvin had billed. We're working with the state's insurance fraud division now, Ethan wrote. They suspect you might not be the only patient he used this way. The foundation is under review too. I read that email on my old laptop by the dim light of the desk lamp. I thought of all the women who'd hugged me at fundraisers and handed envelopes to Calvin, believing they were helping someone like me. I thought of the poor patients he talked about, whose costs the foundation helped cover. I didn't know how many of them were real. I only knew that in some of those dollars moving across his accounts, my name had been the excuse. By late fall, the foundation was hosting its biggest gala ever. The church rented extra chairs, brought in a small band, hung string lights around the fellowship hall, and plastered posters of me on every wall. Calvin told me to prepare something really moving to say, because the foundation had achieved so much this year. People love you, he said, straightening the shawl on my shoulders in front of the mirror. They see hope when they look at you. Don't let them down. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman in her mid-50s with deeper lines, hair just barely filling back in, dark circles under her eyes from too many sleepless nights. I didn't see hope. I saw someone putting on her best dress to tell a story that somebody else had edited without asking her. I'm going to tell the truth, I whispered. That's all I know how to do. He didn't seem to hear that part. He was busy adjusting his tie, checking his phone, answering messages. Maybe donors, maybe reporters, maybe someone else these days. He always seemed busy. That night we walked into the hall to applause. The pastor introduced Calvin. The band played something soft. The air was thick with the smell of catered food, perfume, and old varnished wood. I sat in the front row beside Calvin. On stage, next to the podium, a big sign read Second Chance Hope, give a second chance to a breast cancer fighter. I scanned the rows and spotted Marjorie sitting toward the back, dressed like any other guest but watching closely. Ethan sat beside her in a simple shirt and tie. They gave me the smallest nod when our eyes met. Then I heard my name. Calvin stood, gestured for me to join him, and we walked up together. He spoke first, like he always did. His voice carried easily. Looking at my wife tonight, he began, one hand on his chest, the other pointing gently toward me, you wouldn't know there was a time when I thought I'd lose her. He told the story I'd heard 100 times, but he added details I knew were lies. He described hours-long reconstructive surgery, a long fight against dangerous complications. Every time he said we, a needle went into my skin. The room was riveted. The pastor nodded along, wiping his eyes. I heard the little whispers, God is good. Calvin is amazing. Linda is so brave. And that experience, Calvin said, wrapping up, is what inspired us to create Second Chance Hope. Every dollar you give tonight, every check, every pledge, is a second chance for another woman, just like my Linda. He turned toward me, eyes shiny, smile soft. Now I'd like Linda, the heart of this foundation, to share a few words. I stood. Applause washed over me. I walked to the podium with my hands trembling a little. I looked out over the faces, so many familiar ones, older women who'd held my hand in the church basement, neighbours, townfolks, Marjorie and Ethan near the back. 2 men I didn't recognise standing near the doors, both in dark suits. My name is Linda, I started, voice low and scratchy. Many of you have heard my story before. I used to think the worst day of my life was when the doctor said, "You have cancer." The hall went quiet. I could hear my heartbeat, the rustling of a program somewhere in the back. "But in these last few months," I continued slowly, "I've learned there are things that hurt worse, like the day you get a phone call saying your name has been used for surgeries you never had, that your medical record has been rewritten, not by a stranger, but by the man you call your husband." A ripple moved through the crowd. I didn't look at Calvin. I kept my eyes on the front row, the lined faces, the women who had once squeezed my fingers in prayer circles. "I trusted," I said, my throat tight but my voice clear. "I signed where I was told. I stood here sharing a story because I thought it was helping people I didn't know that at the same time, insurance claims were being filed under my name for procedures that never happened. I didn't know this charity we all love had money flowing through it that was mixed, donations and fraudulent insurance checks." Chairs scraped. Someone dropped a spoon. Calvin stepped closer, reaching toward the microphone, but one of those men from the doorway was already walking down the aisle. Ethan stood up with a man in a badge from the State Insurance Fraud Division. "Mrs. Reed, thank you," the investigator said, stepping forward, his voice firm. He turned to address the room. "I'm sorry to interrupt an evening like this, but we're currently investigating a major insurance fraud case involving Dr. Calvin Reed and the Second Chance Hope Foundation." The air thickened. I barely felt my legs. "What are you talking about?" Calvin demanded. "This is a charity event. If you want to talk, we can schedule—" "We tried," the investigator said, holding up a thick folder. "We have evidence that multiple surgeries were billed under your wife's name and others, with no corresponding hospital records. We have credit card receipts, camera footage, staff testimony. We also have statements from the patients, including Mrs. Reed, confirming those procedures never happened." He glanced at me with a look that was more compassion than anything else. "You can step down if you'd like. We'll handle it from here." I backed away from the podium, my heart pounding in my ears. Calvin grabbed my arm. "What are you doing?" he hissed, smiling tightly for the crowd. "Are you trying to destroy me?" "My name, Calvin," I whispered, finally meeting his eyes. "You know exactly what you did with it." He squeezed my arm hard, then let go when he saw the investigator watching. The local police officer, a man I recognized from church security on holidays, joined them at the base of the stage. "Dr. Reed, you're under arrest on suspicion of insurance fraud, falsifying medical records, and misusing charitable funds," the investigator recited, reading from a card. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The murmuring exploded into a dull roar. Some women were crying. The pastor just stared. A few faces turned toward me, some full of pity, others tight with disapproval, like I'd broken some unwritten rule about protecting our hero. "Linda, say something," Calvin shouted as the officer took his arm. "Tell them you agreed. Tell them." It felt like the weight of all those years settled on my shoulders at once. The chemo nights, the mornings at fundraisers, the papers signed without looking, his voice in my ear saying, "You owe me your life." I took a breath and spoke into the microphone one last time. "I agreed to let you cut the tumor out of my chest," I said, loud enough to carry. "I never agreed to let you cut my name into fake charts to take money." Something broke in his expression then, the polished shell he'd worn for so long, or maybe just my own image of him. The cuffs clicked shut. He kept talking, but the music had stopped, and all I could really hear were the shuffling feet and low voices. Marjorie came to my side, her hand at my elbow. "Let's get you out of here," she whispered. I let her guide me down off the stage, past the rows of chairs. A few people reached out to brush my arm, murmuring, "Bless your heart." Others turned away, not wanting to be clearly seen, choosing a side I passed under the posters of my own face, smiling under the word hope, and felt a hot wave of shame, not for being weak, but for letting someone use that weakness as a prop in their show. A year later, fall came around again. I didn't live in the big house at the end of the street anymore. After the dust settled, lawyers and judges split the assets. I sold the house and moved into a smaller place a little ways out of town. The yard is just big enough for a few tomato plants and some pots of mums. The porch barely fits a small swing, but that's where I sit most evenings, watching the leaves drift down. Calvin took a plea on some of the charges. The rest the court decided after hearings where I had to raise my right hand and tell the truth. They revoked his medical license, sentenced him to prison, ordered restitution. The day they led him away, he turned back to look at me, his eyes full of anger and something like pleading. I stood there with my purse strap gripped tight and I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. People called me cruel. Back at the old church, I heard second-hand comments. He saved her life, didn't he? Couldn't she have handled it privately for the sake of their reputation? I didn't blame them. They only saw the stage, the white coat, the speeches, the hero image. They hadn't sat at my kitchen table with that envelope open, hadn't felt their hands shake answering that first phone call. In my new town, I joined a cancer support group in a church basement. No gala lighting, no fancy music. Just a circle of plastic chairs, a perpetually warm coffee pot, and women with tired eyes. I started sharing what I'd learned about reading the fine print on insurance forms, about never signing something just because he's the doctor or he's my husband. I don't want any of you to ever open an envelope like I did, I told them one night. No one, no matter how much they've done for you medically or emotionally, has the right to rewrite your medical history without you knowing. Sometimes, alone, I think about the good days with Calvin, the evenings we walked down the country road, the mornings he made me breakfast before heading to the hospital, the nights he held me when I threw up in the bathroom. Those memories don't vanish just because I later learned he was a fraud. They sit side by side with the anger and the grief, making the story more complicated than pure victim and pure monster. There are nights when I ask myself, if I'd kept quiet, if I'd covered for him, would my life be easier? Would I still have the old house, the old friends, the polite little laughs at church fundraisers? Maybe. But every time I picture that stack of fake claims, imagine some future day needing treatment and hearing, "Sorry, Mrs. Reed, you already used your benefits on those surgeries." A chill runs down my spine. One afternoon after group, an older woman with more silver in her hair than me, leaning on a cane, came up to me. "You're Linda, right?" she asked, eyes wet. "I saw a news piece on a doctor fraud case. They didn't use your name, but I knew it was you. You did the right thing. Not everyone would have." I smiled a little, feeling my own eyes burn. I just didn't want anyone else's name used like mine was. Back home, I sat in the porch swing, watching the sky turn that soft gold it gets before dusk. The air smelled like dry leaves and damp earth. I sipped my tea and felt the warmth slide down into my chest. If someone online asked now, in that AITA style my grandkids talk about, I'm a wife in my 50s. Years ago, my husband, a surgeon, saved my life by operating on my breast cancer. Later, I cooperated with insurance investigators and attorneys, testified in court, and he lost his license and went to prison for using my name to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars. His family hates me. Some folks at our old church call me a traitor. Am I the asshole? I don't know exactly how I'd answer except to tell the story, step by step. Every sleepless night, every paper, every line he crossed. I just know this. Sometimes standing on the side of the truth means turning your back on things you once loved. And at my age, with the scars on my body and the scars inside, I don't have enough time left to live the rest of my life on forged paperwork and pretty lies. Maybe some will always see me as ungrateful. Maybe others will call me brave. Me? I'm just Linda, the woman who finally learned that her life, her name, and her conscience are not debts owed to anyone, not even the man who once held the scalpel that cut the cancer out.